Good morning and welcome. It's Hump Day, 6 days before the election. And any more in this election cycle, God knows what that means over the next 6 days. And most of you are probably tired of hearing about the presidential politics, but there's a lot of issues you're going to decide locally at the ballot on Tuesday. You got a state's attorney's race, you got some county board seats that are up for grabs, and you're going to have a very important issue, which is the public safety tax. And we've had a number of people in over the last several weeks from all the various departments of the Macon County Sheriff's Office. And I think one of the things that people maybe don't understand is exactly just how much they do in our community. There's a lot of people who have said things like on social media, well, I live in the city of Decatur, so I have the Decatur Police. I don't need the sheriff. And we've had all of these different guests in to tell you whether it's warrants, whether it's the courthouse, whether it's the jail, whether it's patrol, drug interdiction, on and on and on. The list of things that the Macon County Sheriff's Office is responsible for does have an impact completely on everyone in this community. And we wake up this morning to this terrible news out of Iowa where 2 police officers ambushed and killed. This is Des Moines. This is 2 hours away. This isn't Chicago, Illinois, where they've had 600 homicides. And, it's Des Moines, Iowa. Tom, did you wake up this morning when you hear these stories? What's it like when you're a law enforcement officer your whole life when you wake up and hear something like this out of Iowa? And Des Moines, which you think of as like Decatur. I mean, small town America.
Yeah, I didn't have an opportunity to get on the media earlier, but my wife's telling me about it, and then on the way up, my mother's telling me about it on the phone. Obviously, it affects us all. I mean, these are 2 individuals that appear to have been ambushed.
Ambushed in their squad car and dead. I mean, for those that think that this job isn't dangerous or that every stop you make or every encounter you have with anyone could be your last, I just don't think people really have walked in the shoes of law enforcement enough to understand just how much of a danger there is out there.
We know it's an inherent risk whenever we, of course, put on the uniform. But obviously we do it for public service sake, and it's something that we embrace. But when you hear those stories, it hits you, and it hits you hard because we know that that's somebody's father, brother, sister, so forth.
Yeah, they got kids and wives at home and families, and they won't be coming home to them. And I know at the end of the day, whether you're a member of the Decatur Police Department or the Macon County Sheriff's Office or law enforcement anywhere, the mission is protect the public and go home safe. I mean, that's just, why would anyone want to come into this job if that wasn't the mission?
Everybody wants to, of course, continue from day to end, of course, day out, to make sure that they survive. But we know that this is a risk. It hits home when it's close. Obviously, this is one that's kind of hitting home a little bit. All
right. We welcome Sheriff Tom Schneider and Howard Buffett, the undersheriff of Macon County, a non-paid position that has been unbelievable. We were here visiting the other night, and I want to ask Howard to begin with. You have a very interesting theory on the rule of law and how it is sort of the foundation of which countries and nations and cities are built. And without it, what it looks like. You've traveled to how many countries in your career of philanthropy?
143.
143 countries.
I'm trying to get to 150.
Yeah. Well, you'll probably be there by the end of the year, knowing your travel schedule. You said something very poignant, I thought, the other night when you said that you wish that most Americans could experience what you've experienced, to be in a place where there is no rule of law.
Yeah, we work in some pretty tough countries, in Sudan and Burundi and Congo and Sierra Leone and those places. The thing that you begin to understand very well is that all of the issues come back to one thing, and that is you don't have rule of law. So whether it's a conflict area or whether it's not, I mean, and you look at places in Europe and in Bosnia and places that have history of kind of crumbling apart, though you can argue that some of those are ethnic issues, some of those are religious issues, but at the end of the day, the only way you come out of that and you recover from that is if you have rule of law. So rule of law plays an important, well, really a critical piece in different places in the world. But it isn't just law enforcement. People have to, if you are apprehended in Mexico, you have a 5% chance of getting prosecuted. Think of that. I got a 95% chance that I can go deal drugs or shoot somebody or whatever I want to do.
Yeah, 5% risk of going to jail.
Yeah. And so, that's a lack of rule of law. And whether that's prosecutors or judges or law enforcement officers, whatever it is, if you don't have that, you have nothing.
Yeah.
And I've seen that.
So you can bring water to people, you can bring agriculture to people, you can bring entrepreneurship to people, but without rule of law, all of that is almost for naught.
I'll give you a great example. We drilled a well in Ethiopia years ago, and everybody's celebrating the village has water. A year later, we find out that someone's been going to that village and claiming that they're an authoritative individual, and they have been saying, you need to give me your youngest daughter for a week, or you're going to pay me this amount of money, or it was extortion. There was no one to call. There was no one to say, look, this guy is misrepresenting himself. He's extorting us. He's fraudulent. It was by accident that this NGO found out about it, and obviously then it was dealt with immediately. But think of that. You think you're doing a good thing, but because you don't have the rule of law,
you're giving platform to a criminal to extort.
Platform to a criminal.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And then I've watched in my lifetime, Tom. You know, I turned 50 this year. I still don't feel 50, but, you know, when I grew up, you know, whether it was an officer safety or whether it was, you know, someone in the schools, whether it was Scared Straight, you remember that program?
Sure,
when we used to actually talk to kids about, you know, the repercussions of bad behavior. Cops were admired. I was taught that is your friend. You look for that man or woman in that uniform, and that is your safety. We have come full circle in the eyes of a lot of Americans who no longer wish to care to even walk in your shoes or understand what it means. You guys have now been painted as bad guys by so many, you know, and I don't think it's the vast majority of Americans that feel that way. But I think with the media, you know, do you have bad cops?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Bad lawyers, bad radio hosts, bad, you know, but bad lawyers don't make national news.
Yeah, and Brian, you brought that up a lot of times. We appreciate your support because we do believe that we do have a strong support system. Unfortunately, we see the negativity now. Social media plays a big factor in that. It gives actually a platform for individuals to not exploit, but take what would be a negative contact and make it even worse than what it is. So, and we know, like you said, we know that we had to police our own before we police others, and we do a good job of that. But the thing about it is, it comes down to it, is that we're here to help people, and that's the main thing.
Yeah, the main thing. I think there are probably bad officers. You know, people that get on the job that probably should never get on the job. And then I think there are good people who make mistakes. And then I think there's everyone else. And I think that those first two groups are a very small percentage of the overall law enforcement in this country, but they get 98% of the media coverage.
Brian, I tell you, the probably the most important task that we have as administrators and law enforcement is our hiring process. And I think that we do a great job of recruitment, but our emphasis is on getting somebody in there that's going to be a good ambassador for our department. And you know what? It used to be who's the biggest, brawniest guy. That's not the case now. We want the person that's going to represent us in a manner that's going to reflect what our department's about.
Well, my ultimate fear is that less and less people are going to want to be law enforcement officers.
Well, that's already happening.
Yeah. And that without training, which we're going to talk about the training center, how that plays into this, without, who would want to put themselves in this jackpot where every decision you're making to protect your own life or the life of citizens is, the subject of a lawsuit or the threat of arrest, or, we saw what happened in Baltimore, with the prosecution, so quick to jump the gun and not even find out the facts, that people are not going to want to be a part of it. Now, you've got to run an office in a way that you can recruit employees, that you can protect the streets, protect the county, and you have to be able to have the funds to do that. Now, these cuts made by the county board, and people can make their own judgments on what the county board should or shouldn't do, but when they look at you and say, we got to cut $1 million out of the sheriff's budget, and when you realize that the sheriff's budget is 85% people, $1 million means you're going to cut people, you're going to cut training, you're going to cut costs.
Yeah. And Brian, this went on the course ballot about 6 months ago. You didn't hear me out here running around doing anything about it because I really thought that my cuts were going to be 7% and that I was going to be able to deal with it appropriately, maybe through attrition, not replace a couple positions. Sure, that's going to hurt, but I'm not physically laying off people. Whenever the law enforcement safety tax started coming in flat, the projections started showing that they were going to cut me by another $200,000 to $300,000, taking it up to $1 million. I knew at that point in time all the stuff had been cut out. The attrition factor has been eliminated, and now I'm getting into people and layoffs and substantial ones. So that's whenever it clicked to say we got to do something different and we got to push.
There are people out there, and I realize that people are fed up with government. I think local government takes all the flack for this because you don't bump into your congressman at Kroger. You don't bump into the president. Howard does, but most of us don't. So they take out on the city council or the sheriff's office. There's frustration with corruption in Springfield and Washington, D.C. I think it's the exact opposite of what should happen. Your local people are accountable. They're here. Tom Schneider picks up the phone. People have questions. You have answers for them. You run a tight department. You can't cut paper clips enough to save $1 million a year and not impact the safety of this community.
100% correct. If I have somebody show up at the front desk and I'm in a meeting, I feel bad that I can't go away from that meeting, and I usually come back and say, hey, look, let me step out of the meeting for a minute if it's not that important of a meeting. You've got to be responsible to the people that, of course, you serve, and that's the main factor.
And, Brian, if you step back, you have to realize the sheriff's in a very unique position. He's the highest elected law enforcement official in the county. So there's a significant difference between being elected and
appointed.
And appointed. And so the sheriff's office has to be responsive. And I'm not saying that city administrators and chiefs aren't, but he answers to the public in a way that no one else does in terms of law enforcement locally.
Yeah, and I think the great deal of people in this county have nothing but the utmost respect for you and the job you've done. You know, you're not considered a Democrat or a Republican. You're not considered a politician. You're considered a law enforcement guy. And I take great pride in our community that over the years we've elected the best sheriff. You know, it hasn't been a political
I've
thing.
been blessed. I mean, you know that firsthand. And I mean, we'll go down the list from Sheriff Ozappel, Sheriff Roger Walker, and Sheriff Jerry Dawson. Each one of them I try to take a little bit of something from to of course, apply. And to go back to the safety taxes briefly, I talked to the chairman of the board, Kevin Greenfield, and he wanted me to, of course.
And this is important to know.
This is very important because you and I talked about this several times, is that this money will go to the sheriff's office. It will be used to enhance the sheriff's department's operation. It will be put into a special fund. I told him I wanted a resolution to build on this so that this is not something that is going to be lost over the next decade. It's going to be continued on so that they build up enough money to be able to take care of the department for 20, 30 years.
Yeah, and it will specifically go, this isn't some sort of obscure road fund where people can raid and pay for something else. It's going to go for law enforcement.
You said it, Brian.
All right. Now, when we talk about what we're seeing here, I think people would be shocked if they did an overnight ride with you or your sheriff's deputies, the drugs that are coming through our community via St. Louis to Chicago, starting at the border, with the cartels and the stuff that comes in. Do you think people would be stunned? Not necessarily even the local crime, just the stuff that comes through Central Illinois?
We went out on patrol yesterday to pass out gift certificates. We had people. Some people are lucky; they get them. We got like $10 gift certificates. A nice lady gives me them to give out, and so we take an opportunity when we make contact on a traffic stop. First traffic stop, Howard sees is like a kid using his cell phone. Well, we pull him over. He's suspended. The license is suspended. Registration suspended. No insurance, and it's like, wow. Well, we took care of him, and then he goes off, and then they do a next traffic stop, and the person runs from the vehicle. He don't have a license. So you'll be surprised at what's out there, and you're really not looking for it, but these are the people that are operating around you. I think the biggest thing about the drug push you're talking about that affects you and I and all of the other people, a lot of people say, well, the drug dealing goes on in this area. It don't affect me. It's the drugged driving that we're seeing an increase in, and that's a big problem because these people are now unfortunately using heroin or using some type of prescription drugs and are operating motor vehicles. I would say right now that our biggest problem is not as much the intoxicated driver, is the drug intoxicated driver.
All right. Talk about some of the importance of some of the departments, obviously keeping the streets safe, helping stop the abuse of drugs, the schools. We had Elgin in, a few weeks ago to talk about, being in there. In this day and age where we want kids and cops to be able to connect and not have kids growing up afraid of cops but looking at them as role models, how important is it for you to be in those schools?
Well, obviously, that's the foundation. That's where we begin at. We know how important it is when we're raising our children to make sure that they get a good start. And I think that Elgin has done a phenomenal job of being able to embrace everybody in the county, in the city of Decatur, and out in the county schools. And the support that he has is tremendous. I really didn't try to get as much involved in social media, but it's kind of hard not to get involved in social media when you see Elgin out there doing all these positive things.
I remember he had a post where somebody had paid for his pizza at a Casey's, and it was shared like 600 times. I think that shows you sort of the undercurrent of support that maybe you don't hear. It's not the headlines.
That was Howard Buffett that bought that for him.
Yeah. It was a family that didn't know him just because he was there in uniform. No, but I think you guys get some of that. You see that.
Brian, I'm not kidding you, and you bring that up, is that I have a couple of my guys, they keep on coming back, so we keep on going to these restaurants. We're not having to pay for food, and we're trying to pay for it. People are coming forward.
Yeah. Village protection. This is important, too. I know it's important to the city of Decatur, but you guys take care of Forsyth and Macon and Argenta and Blue Mound. What are those communities going to do if you've got 20% less patrol?
Yeah. Well, we'll always honor the contracts. The thing about it is the extra services. Our federal marshal, if we had to pull him out, just yesterday, Brian, our federal marshals set up with our guys and located a homicide suspect from down south, arrested a murder in Decatur. It'll be on a press release, probably coming out next day or two. That's what they do. They go after the bad guys, and you don't know where the bad guys are at until you start hunting for them, and that's what fugitive apprehension is all about.
I don't ever want to be on the other side of a door of Adam Wolf. I'm just telling you that right now.
He don't scare us. So he's a pretty tough guy. What do you think, Howard?
We can handle him.
You guys are grizzled veterans. I don't ever want to be on the other side of the door. The border, we've talked about that a lot, and the drugs that are coming through this country, and it is the cause of most of the gang violence that happens. Those 600 murders in Chicago this year, a great deal of those are starting down in Mexico and coming through our border, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Brian, we have 2 ranches on the U.S.-Mexico border, about 7 miles, 2 very different locations. And I think people would be shocked at the traffic that comes across, that comes with the drugs. And, it's people like to kind of bang on Border Patrol, but Border Patrol's got an impossible job, to be honest with you, set up the way it is today. And so I think we have to change the narrative. The narrative has been that, the border's the border. We have 50 border states, if you really want to think about it.
Sure, because it's impacting everyone.
And Illinois is one of them.
Yeah.
Look at Chicago. Look at St. Louis. Look at even Decatur, Illinois. I mean, those drugs, 90% of them are coming across the Mexico border. That's the estimate by the DEA. They end up somewhere in this country. The cartel operates in almost every community across this country, and we're giving them even better ways to operate when we're doing, and I don't want to get sidetracked on it, but when you start legalizing drugs like in Colorado, if you talk to the sheriffs out there and you hear their stories about what's happening, that's the part of the unintended consequences. So now they're shipping marijuana, high-grade marijuana, which goes to the point the sheriff makes about the accidents that are starting to occur. And so we have to think about this. 50,000 plus American citizens are dying today because of illegal drug use. Now, that's a hockey stick if you look at what it was 10 years ago, and it exceeds firearm deaths and automobile deaths. This is a serious problem, and it does start by what comes across our border.
All right, you believe that, obviously in a political election, we're talking about Russia, we're talking about China, that the greatest danger to us right now is what's happening with these cartels down on the border.
Let me tell you, Michoacan is one of the most important areas to the cartel because they ship in huge amounts of chemical from China to make. They have mega meth labs. You don't hear about too many meth labs anymore. You hear about one here and there, but the meth coming across from Mexico, it was 0 10 years ago, and they apprehended 6,000 pounds last year. That's a lot of meth, and there's a lot they don't get. So if you think about it, China has an easier way to kind of help undermine our society, and that is support the cartels. And if anybody thinks that's an exaggeration, I guarantee you it's not.
All right, we've got to take a break. Howard Buffett, Sheriff Tom Schneider in the studios. We'll be back with more. Here's Lindsay Romano with your 3-day forecast.